Catch you later, Betty. Bye.
Riverdale has come to an end after 7 seasons. Let's talk about the fates of each character and find out just what happened. What's up, y'all? Lisa here, and can you believe it? Riverdale is officially over after 7 seasons. The final episode, Goodbye Riverdale, aired and told us the fate of the majority of our characters. It included a time jump, some wild romances, and more. And I do have a video of me with my reaction to watching the episode, the final episode, so if you want to see that, I'll link that below. I don't know if it's very exciting or not, but you know, sometimes people like reactions, right? And just in case you tuned out of Riverdale a while ago and you just dropped in and you were like, wait, how are these people in the 50s? Basically, at the end of season 6, for a while they've been battling a lot of wild people, including some superpowered supervillains, and they even had superpowers. There were multiverses, there were all kinds of things happening, and then this massive comet was coming to destroy them at the end of season 6, and Tabitha, who ended up being Riverdale's guardian angel, kind of used the last bits of her power, I believe, to save them and send them back to the 50s, and I guess while they sit there and tried to wait for her to figure out a way to bring them back, they just lived in the 50s. So season 7 kind of just felt like a soft relaunch of the show. So if you're just watching the finale, it kind of felt like nothing else before it truly mattered that much, But let's talk about how Riverdale ended for each character, and just a heads up, if you watched the show when it premiered on the CW, on, cable or whatever, like I did, there may be some characters that I do mention here that you're like, I do not remember that scene, I don't remember them being mentioned, because trust me, I was like, what the heck? And then I read a few articles, it's like, I don't remember this. Well, that's because the CW actually has online now streaming an extended version of the episode with about 8 more minutes of footage that gives more context to some scenes, as well as some other characters, minor characters getting scenes for how they ended. But I'll talk about that here, obviously. Okay, so first, just a quick overview of the episode itself, and you can obviously jump to different characters with the time codes below. So this finale starts with a big jump forward. So season 7 seemed like it took place during around 1957. Now we are 67 years later, according to Jughead, who is narrating this episode. So that would make present day-ish around 2024. Now here we meet an old Betty talking to her granddaughter named Alice, which is sweet. That now Betty has lost touch with all of her friends, so we know that as time went on, they all got spread out, and communications in the 50s is not like it is here, where you can just check people's location and bug them every day during texts. So what does she do to find out what happens to her friends? She just waits till they pop up in the obituaries, which is kind of just a dark hobby to have, but the obituary we see old Betty reading is actually Jughead's, who apparently lived to be 84, and now Betty is the last of the Riverdale crew to still be alive. Here's a question I have, though. It says that, Betty is now 86 when Jughead's narrating the beginning, and then she's reading what seems like a new obituary, which has Jughead dying at the age of 84, so I'm curious there where they weren't the same age at some point. Aren't they the same age? I don't know. That was a little confusing, threw me off. Maybe there's something I missed. There's a whole lot I missed, probably. Anyway, Betty is basically reminiscing about her time at Riverdale and how she wishes she could go back there and be young and beautiful again and just live in that world. And so she asks her granddaughter to take her back to Riverdale to visit one last time. And her granddaughter's like, well, we'll see how you feel the next day. So then we have Betty falling asleep, and we get kind of a Christmas Carol type episode as Angel Jughead appears and guides young Betty through a day from her senior year that she actually missed because she had the mumps, and that is the day they all got their senior yearbooks. So we end up seeing Betty float throughout the day and interact with various characters as she either remembers their fates or Angel Jughead fills her in on their fates, and you can just tell it's a goodbye episode with Betty looking at all these people like she's never gonna see them again. But the funniest thing that we learned throughout this episode that I just was like, this is it's Riverdale, you have to end with something ridiculous, is the fact that Archie, Jughead, Betty, and Veronica were in a quad. Not a throuple, like a 3-people thing, but a 4-person couple, a quadruple, or just a quad, I don't know. They were just basically in a polyamorous relationship, all dating each other, and also Betty and Veronica sometimes, but it doesn't seem like there was any Archie or Jughead together. But I think one of the funniest parts is that, Betty is telling Reggie all about this, learning that she was in a quad relationship with those people, and Reggie's just kind of like, why wasn't I asked to be in it? Okay, yeah, but that was just like one of the weird revelations throughout this. Now that we know that we are time jumping to when Betty is the last one left, let's basically find out what everybody else did in their lives up until their deaths. First up, we have Archie. After graduation, he headed out west to California, working on the highways, where he met a woman, settled down in Modesto, and had a family. He ends up working as what they called in the episode a professional construction worker, and then continuing to also be an amateur poet. If you watch this finale episode, go watch the scene where he reads a poem about everybody, and I don't even know if I'd call him amateur. That's just me personally.
You're a rock star greaser. A long way from a cult member who stole organs to put in a freezer.
He then seems to have lived a long life and was buried in Riverdale next to his dad. Now for Reggie, he ended up playing basketball for Kansas State, then he was drafted by the Lakers, and then in the summers and off season, he'd work at his family's farm until his parents passed away, and he ended up having to sell the farm. He eventually got married, had a family with 2 sons, came back to Riverdale to coach basketball, where he stayed until he passed away with his family. His 2 sons ended up still working at Mantle Motors, and then after he passed away, he was buried with his parents and his wife in Duck Creek. Now for Mary Andrews, Archie's mom, she ended up buying a dress shop, and then a woman came in named Brooke. They had a conversation. A few weeks later, moved in together, and then they were together until they passed away. Now, if you remember in previous seasons, Brooke was Mary's old college roommate in a previous Archieverse. Throughout the other seasons, they ended up, whatever you want to call that anyway, they ended up getting married and divorced. So in this final version, they end up having a long, happy life together. Alice and Polly both were alive in this finale. Alice ended up divorcing Hal and is a stewardess. Now, after the pilot on her plane had a heart attack, Alice saved the plane, landing it safely. Kind of felt like a Sully situation. Kind of wild. But, it's Riverdale, so nothing is too wild on this show. One of her passengers who was on that plane ended up asking her to dinner to thank her. They ended up getting married, traveling the world together until she passed away. Now, Polly had her twins, Juniper and Dagwood, and lived out a happy life with her family, but they made sure to point out she never performed again as her burlesque alter ego, who I believe we meet in season 7, named Polyamorous. Yes. Now, as for Veronica, she goes on to basically rule Hollywood. She heads out to Los Angeles, where she calls up Peter Roth, who in actuality was the former head of WB-TV. He makes a cameo in the deleted scene that's in that extended version, and she works as his assistant, then works her way up to running the production company and studio, making tons of movies, winning 2 Oscars, and according to Jughead, some of the most influential movies of their time. Now, they never mention if she ended up getting married or having a family or not, but she was ruling Hollywood, so she probably didn't have time, but she was buried in the Hollywood Forever Cemetery. Now, Fangs and Midge end up together, but Fangs is one of the characters to not get a long, full life and kind of have a tragic death. He is a rock star and ends up marrying Midge, but 4 weeks into his tour, he becomes another, young rock star with a tragic end, kind of like Richie Valens. It turns out his bus blew a tire 4 weeks into the tour, and there were no survivors. Now, thankfully, Fangs did have a gold record that still hangs in Riverdale High, and the success of his songs helped take care of Midge and their daughter for life. So what about Kevin and Clay? They end up having a happy long life together. They get an apartment together in Harlem as they go to college. Clay becomes a tenured professor at Columbia, while Kevin starts an off-Broadway theater company, and basically Kevin lived to be 82. Clay passed away a few weeks later when he was feeding pigeons in Central Park. Alright, what couple is next? We have Toni and Cheryl. Now in the finale, we see them hold this art show, and they continue to live their lives as successful artists and writer, and they become activists. They end up moving out to Oakland Hills, I believe in California. They have a son named Dale, who was named after Riverdale. And in the show, Dale is played by Vanessa Morgan's actual son, which is pretty cute. So now from the extended episode, we find out what happened to some of Cheryl's family. So twin Julian Blossom ends up going into the army and dies at the age of 28 fighting in Vietnam. So my favorite ending is for Nana Rose, who's obviously one of the most iconic Riverdale characters ever, with the best ending. They basically say that every time she died, she just kept being reincarnated. Yes, Nana Rose supremacy. Principal Weatherby and Miss Thornton ended up getting married. I I don't know if we needed to really know about that or care. And then we have Frank Andrews and Tom Keller. So it seems like throughout season 7, Frank and Tom were pretty awful people, homophobic to say the least. And it turned out that they ended up, being those macho men that were suppressing their own kind of feelings. And it was found out that they were actually hooking up with each other on the down low. Well, in the finale, in the deleted scene in the extended version, they meet their fate reminiscent kind of earlier seasons of the show, honestly.
Frank Andrews and Tom Keller were murdered.
By who?
A hustler they picked up one rainy night named Chick.
And then we have Pop Tate, who was actually the first of everybody here in this Riverdale group to pass away. He passed away in his sleep in 1956. We learn this as we see Betty and Angel Jughead go to visit Pop's grave as one of their last stops. Alright, so who's left? We have Betty and Jughead, right? So do they end up together? Unfortunately, the answer is no. None of the core 4 end up as endgame. So we had to listen through seasons of them being like, Veronica being like, oh, we're endgame. Things like that for no one to end up together. Jughead ended up creating a magazine called Jughead's Madhouse Magazine, which is a reference to Archie's Madhouse, which was a comic book magazine from Archie Comics that ran from 1959 to 1982. It's also kind of a callback to Mad Magazine, which I know my brothers grew up on. That started back in 1952. Now, Jughead never got married or had kids, and when Betty asks him if, he ever had any regrets about that, he said sometimes to Betty. So I'm not sure how we're supposed to interpret that one. I think he still had some feelings harboring for Betty. And like I said, we had Jughead passing away at the age of 84. But what about Betty, who was basically our main person throughout this episode? She also had a successful career as a writer. She self-published a bestseller called The Teenage Mystique, then had an advice column called Betty's Diary. Then she went on to New York, where she was a freelancer and also an activist. Then she started a magazine called She Says, the go-to source for feminist and progressive causes that is still currently being published in this Riverdale world. Now, she also never got married, but she did have a family. She adopted a daughter named Carla, and of course, at the beginning of the episode, you meet her granddaughter, Alice. Now, after her time with Angel Jughead, we see Betty back in her old Betty form, and her granddaughter, Alice, and her husband drive old Betty to Riverdale. And when they get there, we see the classic Riverdale sign, town with pep, and Betty is awake, but when they pull up in front of Pops and they're like, hey, we're here, they turn around and they're like, oh, maybe she's sleeping, and the husband's like, I don't think she's sleeping. It turns out Betty has peacefully passed away in her sleep. Now, we then have a transition where we see young Betty get out of the car, where Angel Jughead is narrating, and we see young Betty enter Pops, and opening the door there at Pops is Jason, and she is reunited with all her friends, kind of getting her wish to stay young and beautiful and 17 with her friends forever. I know for some people that probably sound like hell to live your 17-year-old life forever, but maybe she just wanted to live that quad relationship out, because, there were some looks being given in this final little bit that Anyway, what's funny is I've already seen theories going around, like, ooh, were they dead this whole time? What does this ending mean? Like, why would they be forever 17? I just think this is Betty's version of heaven, because if she passed away, you'd see her version of heaven, right? But yeah, that's basically the fate of all the main characters and some of the minor ones for Riverdale as the series has come to a close. It was an interesting episode. It's been an interesting journey with this entire show. I gotta know, what did you think about how they ended things? Are you kind of sad that none of the characters, the core 4 anyway, ended up as endgame? Now, if you watched the finale, did you like the episode, or did you kind of wish they had gone a different route to say farewell? Overall, though, it seemed like most characters lived a successful and happy life, passing away at an old age. So I guess that's a good thing, right? But yeah, let me know what you thought about the ending of Riverdale down in the comments. Which season was your favorite? When was the moment you knew that Riverdale really jumped the shark? I'm kind of like, this was such a, I guess in a way, satisfying ending, but it kind of also just feels like part of me wasted 6 other seasons, because it seemed like none of that had anything to do with what just happened. But maybe that's me. But it also did kind of make me want to go back and start to rewatch the show to just like look at the stuff that I missed, but also relive some of that good stuff that was like the first season or 2, because that was when the show was really good. But anyway, let me know all your thoughts down in the comments below about what you thought about how this show ended up ending, and who knows, you know, with reboots and whatever, we could get another movie and like a movie out of it in like, I don't know, 7 years like they did with like Teen Wolf or something. I don't actually remember how long it was in between that. But yeah, in the age of reboots, you never know how long it'll be until Riverdale gets rebooted. But yeah, let me know your thoughts. Check out more of my videos right over here. You can hit that subscribe button because I always have random videos coming up. And yeah, as always, my name's Lisa. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I'll see you next time.